the solution would be to give them better network equipment that's faster and more secure. So my plan initially was to start with getting the network set up, making sure that we could get to the external network on the internet. And then I was going to move on to security and set that up. So first thing first, I want to research some network equipment for them. So it was a pretty small office, so I wanted to get some small business grade equipment. I had to look up some routers, switches, firewalls. I had to look up a UPS, which is a battery backup, to make sure that our network just doesn't just crash randomly or power goes out. I had to look up some wireless access points. We got some cameras and a DVR because we want to make sure that we don't forget the physical security component of cybersecurity. And we also got a network cabinet to keep all that contained and lock it up as well, to go along with the physical security point. I wanted to make sure that we also got some reasonable priced network equipment. When I was looking for routers and switches, some of them were up to like $2,000, $3,000. So I was trying to find some equipment that was more cost effective. And we didn't need a gigantic switch with like 48 ports, so we just got one with 16 and stuff like that. So initially, to set up my network, I connected the new router to the old router to serve as my ISP. And I was going to try and make sure that that would work before switching over the network off of the new equipment, just to make sure that we don't take down the business for a while. So that was how I was initially going to plan on setting up all the equipment, just making sure it worked through the old router and then switching over. So for configuring the router, I had to learn the Cisco command line interface, which for those who've taken BlockLayer's user experience class, they know that the command line interfaces are a lot harder to work with. And you have to learn and know the commands on what to do in order to set it up. So I have pretty much or had no experience working with the CLI or CLIs in general. So that was a big undertaking that I had to do for this project. And on the initial setup of the router, one of the biggest problems that I came across was setting up the ports and trying to give them IP addresses. I initially didn't realize that 4 of the ports were switch ports or layer 2 ports, which means that they don't directly work with IP addresses. So when I was trying to configure them and give them IP addresses, they were just not recognizing the command and they had no idea what I was saying. So I eventually had to like go through Google and try and find a bunch of information to try and see like what the issue was. And I eventually discovered that you needed to create a virtual LAN for them so that they could be given IP addresses. So that was probably like one of the biggest headaches initially going into the project and in the project in general. After I got that figured out, I set up the DHCP server so we could give the endpoint devices an IP address, so we know how to communicate with them. And then I set up a DHCP IP pool so that we could have a set of IP addresses that were sectioned out for people or devices that needed to be given static IP addresses. And I also set up DNS servers so we could figure out the domain names and convert them into IP addresses. I used Cloudflare and Google DNS, which are free and publicly available DNSs that anyone can use. And then I had to configure the network address translation or NAT so we could have our private IP addresses be turned into the public IP addresses so we could communicate with the outside world. And then I wanted to set up authentication for our network or for our router. So initially, when you're setting up the device, it's just using a basic password that's unencrypted and not safe at all. So I created a user account for myself, and I made sure I was using the secret password, which is just a fancy word for an encrypted password. And then I set up, when you're communicating with the router, that I wanted to use SSH or secure shell instead of Telnet, because Telnet is not a secure way of communicating with your equipment. So I made sure we had SSH to make sure that we're having encrypted traffic when we're talking to our router. And then I set up an access list for our secure shell. So the only way you can communicate with the router is if you have the specific IP address. I set it to be one IP address that was in our static pool. And I had my computer set up to be that static IP address, so only I could communicate with the router. Following that, I set up switch. That was just a graphical user interface on the web browser. That was pretty easy to figure out. You didn't really need to like configure much. You just need to set like an outside address port, which means that's the one that's connected to our router and is giving internet. Then we need to set up all the other ones to be the inside ports, so they're communicating with our endpoint devices. Then I configured wireless access points. Those were also really easy. You just need to give it a name and a password for people that are trying to connect via Wi-Fi. And then I also made sure that I turned on encrypted traffic using WPA3 Personal and WPA2 to make sure that we can't get network sniffed by things like Wireshark and other applications similar to that. And then I configured the firewall. And unfortunately, when I was configuring or trying to even get to the firewall, they didn't give me a little connection guide that was like, hey, here's the IP address that you need to type into your web browser to connect to it. And like, here's the username and password that you need to log into the device. So I had to try and figure out what it was because it wasn't giving me an IP address. It didn't have DHCP set up. So that was kind of a pain. That was the other big issue with this project. And I also had to try and figure out what the default username and password were. And eventually, after going on Google and trying to search it up, we were able to find it. The firewall was also a web interface with a graphical user interface, so that wasn't super hard to figure out where to go on there. I also had to set up a little bit of like networking configuration. So this is the port that's getting the internet. These are the ones on the inside. So that wasn't super bad because I had already worked with the router to figure that out. Then I configured the access lists. Initially, it was just allowing everything, which is definitely not what you want to do, and generally not even just the base configuration for most firewalls. So I set up the inbound rule to deny all for just the default, and I gave the outside like outbound rule to allow all, so we could create more secure traffic flow. And I also added a few more configurations for that and more policies, but I didn't really get around to doing as much as I wanted to, but I plan on working on in the future. And then we also had the Cisco Smart License, which gave us a bunch of different functionalities for our router or for our firewall. And it gave us a IPS, which is an intrusion protection system, so we could deny attackers trying to come into our network. And then I also gave us URL packet filtering, so we could deny certain websites, such as like inappropriate ones for work, like alcohol or drugs or anything of that nature. So as you can see on the right, that's my network rack that I was managing for the cables. This is a network rack that I was at on Monday for my job. That was a CarMax. As you can see, it's kind of messy and sloppy. Honestly, that's pretty typical for most like businesses. I've been to some Walgreens and some Kohl's, and they were like really sloppy as well. And unsurprisingly, Tesla had really nice cable management, which I thought Littman would be interested to hear. As you can see, we also color-coded our cables. So the purple cables coming in are the cameras going to our DVR. The red cables were the internet coming in from our modem, and the blue cables were our endpoint devices coming in. just to make sure that we have everything nice and laid out for us. Here's one of the wireless access points I mounted. I have a little bit of experience running cable and mounting the wireless access point, since that's what the internship I'm doing right now mostly does. But it was a decent sized building, so it was a little difficult to run cables, and I'm not great with heights, even if it's just a few feet up. So it was a little bit challenging for me, but it wasn't terrible. And we also configured the DVR and mounted the cameras. That was also mostly physical, but we wanted to make sure we didn't forget the physical component of cybersecurity. But yeah, it was mostly just mounting it, running cables, setting them up. Really wasn't that hard. That was one of the things we used the static IP address for. So when we're trying to access the DVR and look at footage, it's just an easy way, and you don't have to try and figure out what the IP address is for that. And I also set it to record on motion, so we're not just having a ton of footage to try and like sort through. You can just see the parts that are important. I also tried to configure port forwarding for the DVR because the client wanted me to make it so he could come and check on the footage from his home or wherever he was if he wasn't at the business. This was probably one of the biggest setbacks in my entire project. While trying to mess with the router and get it so we could port forward, I was changing a bunch of things and not really being careful, and I ended up deleting my default IP route, and it took down the entire network. And I was trying to figure it out for the longest time, and I eventually just gave up and was like, I'm going to factory reset it and then just reconfigure it from scratch. And unfortunately, while I was doing that, I did forget to do one thing, even though the network was still set up. But after I set that up, I did figure out the issue with the port forwarding. And the issue was that I only had UDP set up for the port forwarding, and I needed to set up TCP as well because it was using both. And eventually I figured that out, but that was a pretty big issue for my project. I also held a meeting for end user security because our company does bring your own device, which is a pretty big security risk. And I was also talking to one of the employees, Vince, and he was talking to me about cybersecurity, and he said that he believed the lock on your URL when you're on a web browser meant that the website was to be trusted. And obviously that's wrong. It's only thing that means is that your network traffic between each other is encrypted. That doesn't mean the website is necessarily safe. So I thought it would be a good idea to talk with the end users, because they're probably one of the biggest risks nowadays with your networks. So I talked about a lot of the basic things like passwords. Make sure you're using passwords that aren't like 5 characters. Make sure they're not words on a dictionary. Make sure that you're using letters, numbers, and special characters. I told them to install antivirus. I recommended ADG since it's free, and Dr. Wall also recommended that to us. I gave them some basic information about emails and messages. Make sure you're checking the email that they're using. Make sure there's no misspellings that are looking like it, just so they're trying to imitate the person. Make sure that they're mentioning specific information and not just using general information, because when they're mentioning general information, it's usually just spam that they're sending out. I also told them to not click links. Make sure that when you're going to a website that you're typing it in yourself, because when they're displaying links, it's not always the correct link that it will send you to. So here's our current network setup. We have our internet service provider coming to our firewall, and we have our outside interface being configured from port 1 to be set up with that. Then we have our firewall going to our router, and then a router to our switch. And we're using a VLAN to give IP addresses through the switch to our endpoint devices like our PC and our laptop. So what did I learn? I got a lot of networking skills through this project, obviously. learning how to configure all of that was probably one of the fun parts for me. I got a lot more experience with command line interfaces, not only just the network equipment itself, but also on computers when trying to diagnose problems on your network. Following that, I also learned how to diagnose problems on network connectivity. I eventually figured out through that that I deleted my default IP address my default IP route, which was the reason that I couldn't connect. I also got a lot of hands-on experience, which is personally the way I learn best. And it helped me apply my cybersecurity teaching here at Concordia and really confirm that information. So what's next? I'm going to keep playing with the firewall and make more policies to try and make it more secure. I'm going to keep learning about penetration testing because currently my information's relatively basic. I can use things like Nmap, which is actually discovered an issue with one of our open ports, 22, which is our secure shell connection to our router. When I reconfigured it after factory resetting it, I forgot to make an access list to only allow one host. So that was one of the things I gained from penetration testing. I also want to set up a VPN for remote access so employees can access our internal network from their homes. And I also want to provide another network for the tenants that are moving into our office building. Currently, we're only using like half, so we're going to give them the other half. And they wanted us to set up a network service for them, a managed network service. So we're going to set up a new rack for them and give them a different VLAN demonstrated here so that they are having separated network traffic from ours, because obviously we don't want the two businesses to be able to see and interact with each other. That's pretty much it.
So a question, if you go back, you're on the back. So what's the difference in terms of equipment between your firewall and your router?
The firewall is like kind of filtering traffic. The router is kind of like making the connection between our endpoint devices into the outside world.
Are they physically different pieces of equipment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because usually in your home grade routers, they'll be all-in-one devices. There'll be switches, access points, routers, sometimes even modems. But yeah, these are all separate pieces on so this right here is our firewall. This is our router, which they're both pretty small, so we just stack on top of each other. Here's our switch.
And in terms of looking at a VPN, so I think you mentioned that you did finally figure out port forwarding.
Yep.
Did they have a remote access option in the end?
Yeah, they could. Yeah, they could connect with it remotely.
Right. But you're hoping to make that full.
Yeah, to make
anything.
That's something with the router that I need to with the firewall that I need to play with more as well. So
yeah, in the end, was your final solution something that solved their problem? Is it running?
Their network's a lot faster now.
And this is live.
Yeah,
they're using it.
Yeah, it's a lot faster now. Before they had some pretty old equipment, so it was really slow.
Other questions? All right. Wants to go.
Our presentation for the evening. I first wanted to congratulate every senior for the Capstone projects that they put their effort and time in. I know this is definitely a long project and very intensive, and I just want to congratulate every senior in that regard. So I attended a few presentations, and I've seen a few industry projects, and Alex and our project is going to be an industry project, and I also had the privilege of working with Alex and working on an industry level project. So this is our Capstone project. So to give a brief introduction, the project that both of us worked on is known as the COOS project, and it is the COOS project, and our client is the company we interned at, which is SkyJet, because this is primarily an internal project. We're going to be covering all the information before we get to the demo, and then we'll show the demo at the very end. And yeah. And I'm going to be going into the three common questions that every senior had to answer. But before I continue, I first want to give credit to someone who created the initial version of the COOS project, and that person was another senior 2 years ago by the name of Noah Kurtz. Noah created this version 2 years ago and presented it as his capstone, and I think it would honestly be. And I looked into the three basic questions, and I find it to be rather cool to compare what he had for the answers for these three basic questions, and then compare it against our answers to show the evolution of the project and some of the similarities and differences. So, in regards to the problem that Noah addressed originally when he was tasked with this project is that this was in the heart of the lockdown and many people were sent home, and this caused many people to have less face-to-face communication with each other. And our problem was somewhat similar to this, minus the COVID-19 lockdown and the fact that there was still not enough face-to-face online communication with employees within the company, and to praise each other for their hard work and success. And that brings into why does there need to be a solution? And the simple answer from Noah's perspective is that the problem needed to be solved in order to prevent the company culture from dying. And this was a legitimate problem to solve. And we had our answer to create a positive and innovative working environment for all employees at SkyGen. And we specifically chose innovative because it is a core value at SkyGen, so it also boosts the company culture as a whole. And then for the proposed solution, the solutions are pretty much the same, but Noah's solution was an online web application that was hosted internally for every SkyGen employee to use and access. And our solution was a Blazor Stack web app that is hosted internally with Azure for every SkyGen employee to use and access. And we'll be going into the specifics for Blazor and Azure, but basically that was the solution that was presented in the answer to those three basic questions. And so now that I've presented these three basic questions, I'll be going into a brief history on the COOS project. Because like I mentioned before, Alex and I did start working on the project. This wasn't the first version of the project, and we didn't start, and both of us created the second version of it. So I'll just be starting the history of it. So the history first began when Noah started to work on the project back in March of 2020. And he started to work on it heavily in July and August of 2020, along with his manager. And there was also an intern that helped work on this project briefly during the summer with him as well. And then in December of 2020, he presented this project as his capstone. And this was the first version of the COOS project. And as you can see, it was very plain, but nonetheless, he was very proud of the project. It was something that he did not do before, and it's something that Alex and I can both agree with that we haven't done before as well. And then continuing on, the project the project would have been a success, but it wasn't deployed because Azure JS was discontinued in December 31st of 2021. And Azure JS was basically the primary framework that ran the application. Without it, it couldn't be deployed. And then company production ceased during this time as well, during the discontinuation of Angular JS. And then the COOS project was later revisited in the spring of 2022, and the application was first created in June of 2022. And this was the same time that I was brought into the application, and I helped to create the first template at the beginning of June. After June, the application continued to be developed over the summer, and Alex was eventually brought into the project in late July of 2022. And then in late August of 2022, I received approval from my manager before I got approval from Dr. Lippman to work in this capstone, help the team and work on this capstone project. And then I know Alex and I were talking in August to see if we could do it as a joint capstone project, and that's what happened. We got approval to do this as our joint capstone project, and we ended up working on it throughout the school year, which brings us to today where we're presenting the new version the CUIS project. And that is a brief history of the CUIS project as a whole. And now I will turn this over to Alex, where he'll basically share what kind of applications we used in the industry and the process that they follow. All right. So our application was a web app. So the main languages we used were C#, SQL, HTML, CSS. And then for the IDE, we use Visual Studio since C# is probably best supported there. And it has a lot of like other features too that help us tremendously during our development process. And the main framework for our project was ASP.NET Core Blazor. So what this allows you to do is essentially create interactive web app using only C# instead of JavaScript. And along with that, we use Blazor, which is a material design framework for Blazor. So essentially, it's like a UI framework for Blazor. So it's like Bootstrap in that sense. And then on the backend side, we use Microsoft SSMS to store and persist our users' data. And for version control, we deploy our code and keep track of different versions on Azure DevOps server. And then lastly, we use this tool called Snagit to take screenshots of our code in case we find bugs that need reporting or we want to show our code fragment to somebody. And then I guess like the daily process for both of us was during the summer, I think we meet every single day in a Scrum meeting, and then 3 times a week during the school year to talk about like our plan for the project, things like what tasks need to be done today or like soon, what bugs need fixing, what new features we want to implement next, and stuff like that. And then afterwards, we get off the meeting, we go to the task board and confirm what we need to work on for that day. And after we know what we'll work on, we'll then create a branch from Azure DevOps so that it doesn't interfere with the master branch, which is the latest version of the working code. After the work is done, we push our changes to Azure DevOps and then create a pull request. And after that, we post the pull request link into our dev chat, waiting for approval. And then after our code gets reviewed and approved, the changes that we made eventually gets merged into the master branch. And then as far as so for me, what went well in terms of the project is the coding base was very familiar and easy to pick up. We primarily use C# as the foundational programming language for programming. And some examples of this were writing functions and writing class variables. This was primarily used throughout the entire project. And another thing that went well was easy to pick up was web design languages as well. Because while I didn't learn much web design here, I learned some HTML and CSS back in high school through web design class. And the fact that I could combine that knowledge base with the foundation that I have now, I found that to be very, very cool and very, very interesting. And then in addition to this, creating and integrating Blazor and Blazor components also came very easy once I learned it, because originally I didn't learn these, and that goes into my next slide, which is I basically learned these applications and then was able to and they were very easy to do. And that's something I found to be fascinating too, is that, before this project, I always had an idea of potentially creating a website from scratch. And I never knew a way to do that. And when I was introduced with Blazor, I found it to be so cool that you could do that. That you could create a website from scratch from just code. And that's something that I definitely learned and was very interesting. And I also learned some industry tools and standards, processes, practice as well that only you would find the industry would be there. And going back to what went well, the team basically has a successful web application that's constantly changing. And I will say the application isn't done yet. There's still more to do, but it's definitely getting to a point where it could be deployed. And then there's an efficient software development process that was already there, that in the fact that the process was there, we could develop software. It went well. So that's everything that went well. What went wrong was that there were many instances where customizing MudBlazer components was very difficult. And the one thing I'll say is that MudBlazer is very good when it comes to having that UI or having pre-built components that you can integrate. But when it comes to customization, it can be a challenge. And then there was also solving difficult coding problems that also was a challenge as well. A specific example I can recall was when I had to create this component, which was an avatar selection dialog. And basically what I had to do is when a user clicked on a button to update their avatar, I had to allow that user to basically select their avatar. And each avatar had its own ID, so it could connect to the database. And then if the user were to collect avatar 3, it would be selected. And the main challenge was not the implementation of this. The challenge was trying to communicate between two different components, because the layout, which consisted of just this collection of avatars, was completely different than the single avatar as a whole. And the biggest problem was trying to get this selected text to appear. And it just took some problem solving to try and figure that out. And what I eventually ended up doing is I had an array within the selection layout dialog, and I also incorporated a feature within the avatar component to allow it to be selected. But that array would basically have a set of Boolean variables that when the avatar, like let's say avatar 2 would be selected, that Boolean variable would change and everything else would be false, because there was a parameter within the component that would be true if it was selected. And then along with that, there were also annoying bugs that I had to deal with as well. And one specifically I can think of is the F bar. And yes, I put a little bit of humor with Chuck Norris. But basically, the main problem was the notification bell icon and the fact that needed to stay put. But every now and then, Mr. Gonzalez would kick the bell icon, and basically I would have to keep telling him to stop. And that's not actually what happened. No, what happened is whenever the user scaled down the website, the bell icon moved to the name, and that's something that I think I ended up fixing by just increasing the width of the greeting there in order to patch that. So, and then there were some other things, minor bugs with Visual Studio that were just annoying. There was a CSS bug every now and then that it may happen one day, not the next, where I would adjust some styling, run the application, and the styling wouldn't display, and I had to wait till the next day till that styling did display. And there were also some compiling errors, and every now and then, it didn't happen as often, probably happened more often over the summer, but every now and then assembly files would be missing, and I would have to track down and replace those files within the master branch into my current branch. And then there were also there was a multiple start project error. And so when the application runs, there's two projects running. There's the main static web app that basically has everything the user will see. And then there's the API that connects to the database. Every now and then the API project would be deselected, and this would cause problems when communicating with the database, and the application just wouldn't work. So that's everything that went wrong. And I know this was not included in many presentations, but it's something I felt I should probably share. For the two things I can think of for why I could have improved is one of the main things is I have a weakness of perfectionism. I've had people that have told me it, and I definitely am starting to see it now. And there were a few instances in the industry where I felt like things had to be set out to be a certain way, and in reality, it probably didn't. And this is something, looking back on, I felt like I could probably have done better in if I were to redo this project again. And then along with this is to continue to build up my knowledge as a software engineer. About 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my manager recommended a book for me because I asked him what I could do to improve my knowledge. And this book that I'm basically showing has all the tools that I'm using currently right now, and it will help me to build my skill set in the future. And in addition to this, searching up online tutorials is definitely something I would do as well. And that's something I would encourage any senior and any underclassmen, is that if you can build, even doing simple side projects can definitely build up your skill set. And even if it isn't that, reading a concept, or I think of a tech talk a while back I attended on quantum computing, researching into that and just familiarizing yourself with a technology that may appear, it may benefit you in the long run. And it will, because computer science is ever changing. So that's what I could improve. If I had another month to continue what I've worked on, I think one of the things that I would do is I would finish up the current component I'm working on. And that is basically, I have a single notification that on a notifications page in which if the user clicks on a notification, it will take you to the notifications page and display that single notification. And that's something I probably will be able to fix up by the end of the week. But that's what I would do. And then I would also implement new components as they come up. It's really hard to pinpoint which components there are because there's so much that needs to be done. The more time I had, the more features I would be able to implement. And this would also include fixing bugs when they come up as well. Bugs are everywhere. And then again, I would continue to research into the tools I'm using. And I would also want to learn a little bit of the back end, because I know Alex and we both focused on the UX side rather than the back end. And that's something I think both of us would like to learn more of, is the API and the database. Implementing AIs, working with database tables, or SQL. So that's everything of what was easier or harder, but I do if I had our month. And now I will turn over to Alex for him to go over what he thought.
So I guess what went right or what was easier on my part was that for me, I thought catching up to the project was a little harder. As James mentioned, I was brought on later on, but I thought it took me like 2 weeks to catch up, but it actually only took me like a couple of days to know my way around the code pretty well. And then another thing that was on the easier side, I feel like, was that I came in and I already have like a pre-made plan for me. So it's easier in the sense that I'm literally always guided and have a clear direction to go towards right away, instead of having to come up with that on my own from the beginning or as I go about the project. And then creating new components was something that was pretty, I want to say more fun than easy, but because it's fun, it made it easier. I was able to apply a lot of like the front end knowledge that I know in prior, and also able to learn new stuff along with by using the UI framework. So that process itself was like very satisfying, but the hard part was fixing the bugs that come with the new components, and I'm definitely guilty of that. I created a component, we put it in, and then there was a bug already. So like sometimes it just couldn't pinpoint down exactly where the bug is coming from, and spent countless hours on the one bug, and that's not something you really want to do. And then another thing was refactoring our code. I know this is something both James and I thought had the hardest time with. We learned the hard way for sure, because early on in the project, we too often created custom styling for like almost every new components that we make. And that later on, well, instead of using what the UI framework provides to us, we did that. And that later on created many conflicts within like our styling. And we had to backtrack and fix that. And that took away the time from progressing the project. And then another thing that I found difficult was naming things. At times there was like last name of variables that were they're the same. They kind of have the same functionality, but they don't. Like they're similar, but they're not exactly similar. So for like those kind of variables, it was kind of hard to name them, I found. And lastly, is connecting the data and the UI is probably what I had the hardest time with. It really just comes down to making the right call to the database, getting the correct return results, and displaying that on the web. But that process itself was something I didn't really have much experience with in prior. So I would say that one was probably the hardest. And then what I learned is really similar to James, is get to use the industry tools, like a lot of tools that I never used before, like the framework. I never used the UI framework. I've never used that before. C# we had a little bit of experience at school, but the only class I can recall using that was the software engineering class. So not much experience at all with that. And then I get to see and learn the software development lifecycle in action for real, instead of my little application. And then get to learn the better program practices with the like senior devs that they taught us. And then if I had another month, I would add the ability to include like photos or GIF in the message that we could send to our coworkers. More relevant name suggestions based on user department. So right now, when you search somebody's name, it appears alphabetically. And most of the time, for me at least, when I open that up, I don't recognize any of those names. So realistically, when you give somebody a kudos, you would give to somebody who you work with, usually, which would usually be somebody who's in your department. So it's kind of like people you might know feature kind of thing. And then the ability to delete or undo the post that you just wrote to somebody if you didn't need to do that. And then also the ability to edit the message if you have like a typo or something like that. And then the ability to react to posts other than liking. And right now, I think that's the only way we could like express or interact with a post, that we could like a post. But I feel like having the ability to like laugh or like drop a heart or something like Facebook kind of thing would be kind of cool. And yeah, that's all I have.
And then we're only getting the demos. What was the room number?
B5.
You can this one. Am I okay now? My life? Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think we'll just go through what we did. I think specifically, we'll rephrase, there's a login screen that happens, and I think that was never pretty nice, but essentially you log in. And I think there was, rephrase, this would be the first page you go onto in newsfeed. I helped to basically create, I think, this component here. And I think it was revised by someone else, but originally I ended up creating that. And I think we also, yeah. And I think, I guess for using the application, you can search. This was done by Alex. Like if I were to search for, if I were to just search for software developments, and you can also search up by nicknames as well. I don't think I think originally you could, and then now you can actually search up specific posts, and now there will be specific posts related to Alex once you search that. You can also write a kudos, and that's I guess it's the main theme of the project, is writing a kudos and giving each other kudos and complimenting each other. And if I were to do the same thing, where if I were to create a kudos for Alex again, your name will show up. Okay. And full name. And I can select the kudos type. I give them, I found it. And I can even select a core value that's unique to Skygen. And he helped to work on the dialogue as well. I'll just say thank you for creating the dialogue. Something more. And then you can submit, and I think this is still a work in progress, where we're trying to cap a limit on how many kudos each person can give to sort of monitor, like, because the way this application works is you can write a kudos, and each kudos, or I think it's each kudos you receive, you get points, and that points can be used towards a shop that is available. And I guess to show a little bit of that, you have a shop here, and I think I don't know how I got it. It's 100 points per kudos, correct? No, okay. I think it's 100 points per kudos. So yeah, if I have like 2,500, I can select an Amazon gift card. I think I think this will work. Oh yeah, it works. It doesn't work completely yet, but yeah, that's going back to here. I think I helped to create this component as well. And then this is a user level component. This was fairly difficult. I created this at the beginning of the summer, and I literally had to, because there was nothing on Monplacer that had this specifically. So I ended up finding a tutorial online, finding some sample code online, and I customized it to how it matched in the prototype. And this was just, I think originally this was an undertaking, but it looks very impressive, especially when you refresh the page and it automatically goes. And then I think you also had this dialogue that I also helped to create, and there's different ranks that each person can get. You start with a newbie rank, and you get up to, and you work your way up to the highest. Sort of a fun, again, it's a fun application overall. And then the leaderboard, as everyone, I think how we currently have it set up is how many kudos each person has. I know the company or the team I'm working on, we're working on envisions trying to have multiple tabs where you could see how many kudos you've earned total and how many you've had monthly. So it's still a work in progress, but currently it is total. And then if we went to the profile, you can write, I think there's another option to write a kudos as well in here. And if I wanted to, I could update my avatar, and it does indeed work, and also has some cool features as well. And I'll just select a cat because I like cats. Sorry for any person that likes dogs. And then you can also update your personal information. So, yeah, you can type in here from, like if I were to, yeah, and you can update your personal information. And this personal information is primarily for like contacting if you order something from the shop and they need to ship you something, or just email you. Then I think that's, yeah, that's everything. Is that everything on pages now? And then there's also, you can receive notifications, and it does not work to click. That's on my personal virtual machine, but yeah, you can click on, you have notifications and you can click on show all to see all of your notifications. And again, how this would be envisioned is you can eventually you could click on a single notification, and then eventually you could see that notification on the same page. And then there's also an option to clear all. I'm not going to clear all my notifications just because I may need them, but yeah, that's basically. Oh yeah, and you can like other people's posts too, and see what kind of likes you have. I think that's about all in terms of, and yeah, there's a today's words of wisdom that has a quote that basically generates. And we also built in a feature that if people wanted to click around, they could actually click through all of these and see each one. So that was unique to the team as well. I think that's about it in terms of the demo. I'll open it to any questions.
What kind of contact did you have with Noah at the beginning of this? Like you said, you started this project a couple of years back. So what contact did you have with him initially? A follow-up to that is, how did you go about trying to differentiate yourselves from what he did other than just changing technology?
So I will be honest, I don't know how much contact I initially had with him originally. I had contact with my manager who envisioned at the beginning of the summer of a new version of this project. And I'm sorry, I completely forgot your second question.
So what did you,
yeah,
not having contact with him, what did you try to do to differentiate what you guys did on the original one? And maybe it's better just to answer, what did your manager wanted you to revisit this? What was wrong with it before, and why did it need to be revisited? So
again, going back to the problem was there was an old framework that was discontinued, and what was completely different between the project previous to Noah's project and now is we completely scrapped Noah's project and we just started from scratch. We had a blank prototype from the UX team, and we just incorporated that into the new application.
So was his project used at all as reference when you were doing this, or did you just have the idea of what he tried to accomplish as your starting point, and then you just did it with the new framework from scratch, not really using his for anything?
I think I rephrase it. I know at the beginning of the summer, I don't know about before I was hired, but I did look through the project to see what the application was about, to get an idea of what I was getting myself into. So we did reference it. We just completely created a brand new application instead of copying his application and then just modifying it.
Sure. Yeah. What about since? Have you gone and shown Noah what you have done here, had him look at it, or get his impression?
Yeah. I think we'll rephrase. He has seen this project because he's included in the same team chats, and he's definitely impressed with the project overall. And I think he's proud to be the one that created the first version initially, but he's definitely impressed with the application as a whole.
If I text him right now, you should say he's impressed with it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I can say it because I can say that confidently because I met with him to try when I was incorporating the history section presentation, and he's impressed by it. Yeah.
All right. So then, on a different note, from a software development lifecycle perspective, what was different in reality from, let's take our software engineering class 370, what you learned in there relative to what real life was, having to work with a team, and then specifically, were there any weird things you had to do to work directly with kind of a fellow student to separate the project into subcomponents and those types of things? Let's start with the first part. How is real life software development lifecycle different than what you maybe are taught in the classroom?
So, and I guess if you have something else, I would be open to that. I mean, what's taught in the classroom is, again, I mean, you have Agile, I'm assuming Agile Development is still being taught in software engineering. Yeah, I mean, that you're taught Agile Development and you're working as a group. I think primarily the differences is probably in tools. Like, you know, in software engineering, Azure was not used. And I know in Azure, in Azure DevOps, you have basically a list, you have user stories, and you have tasks within those user stories. And you basically, each of those tasks are assigned to people. And I think you can also create tasks and assign to yourself as well, especially if there's some features that need to be done. But I think that's primarily is that having an online application to sort your tasks is something different. I guess, I don't know, probably maybe industry standards. Like, I think I remember a few instances, like especially in the avatar selection dialogue, I used class variables, and that wasn't necessarily an industry practice, or at least it should be minimized. And especially when it comes to functions, I think I remember talking with one developer that the functions in terms of these razor pages should act like functions instead of depending on class variables. So that's something I would say different. It's different industry standards. I can't really think of anything else. Do you have anything that you're thinking, Alex?
I mostly agree with James, what he has to say. I think the only thing different from classroom and real life is just a matter of application, I guess, because from my experience at least, we didn't really get to fully apply all the concepts that was taught in a cycle into our software engineering projects, because I don't remember having version control. It was just whatever we had was just the latest. We didn't branch out or anything like that. But yeah, and then another thing was we had consistent meetings, at least in the real world, instead of every now and then with our fellow classmates.
I couldn't agree more. That's a consistent highlight, because even in software engineering, I felt like there wasn't like regular. There were meetings, but especially because I was the team lead in the group, there wasn't like regular meetings. I guess the consistency. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Other questions?
This might be above your grade, but you know the decision, sorry, you know the decision of using C# over like a different JS framework like React or Vue? If you don't know, that's fine.
I do not.
I guess just it's like a Microsoft ecosystem, so that's probably why they use C#, because everything is integrated within Microsoft products. So they try to stick as close to Microsoft as possible. Oh yeah, I hope I would get paid more.
I would also include Blazor in that, because I know Blazor was started by Microsoft, so that may be another reason as well.
I'm chatting with Noah right now, by the way.
Okay.
The last thing I said was they had a llama meme in their presentation, obviously problematic.
Which is me.
All right, other questions? Going once? Going twice? From now, Emily?
Yeah.
All right, so hi, my name is Emily Sear. I'm going to be presenting on my senior project, which is currently named Chronically Tracking. Don't know if I like that, but it's what I chose. Sorry, my computer's freezing up. So a quick disclaimer, my app pertains to health related data. All data within this application is either going to be my own, which I am sharing willingly to you guys, or mock data. So please don't call HIPAA on me. I would prefer to not deal with them. So yeah. So a little background on me for my application. Since I was 14, as I was in this photo, I've been chronically ill. I have a couple of different conditions, but just to explain it for this presentation, they're basically dealing with my nervous system, doesn't work properly, my neurons misfired. So throughout this period of time, there's a lot of work that needs to be done when you're chronically ill, managing doctors, managing symptoms, medications, just dealing with daily life as someone who's not healthy. So there's a lot of work that you have to put into your life with that. So this is a quote from one of my favorite songs about being chronically ill. It's a full-time job, is this much work. So my project was to try to make that a little better. So the problem I was trying to solve is that there's no current way to track all symptoms via phone and format these in a way to show medical professionals. So how I happened upon this problem was my sophomore year, I was pretty sick. It got to the point where I had to track my symptoms every day as per my doctor's orders, as that was the only way they were going to find something that was wrong with me. And so I was like, there has to be an app for this, right? Like it was 2020. I'm like, someone had to have done this. And there is nothing. So then I was like, okay, there has to be a website. Like this is a little crazy. Like there has to be something, and there's nothing. So my solution at a time was to recreate something I used in physical therapy a lot. So I used all of my print credits and printed out a lot of these and then handed a big old binder to my doctors. So for about 6 months, I filled out these every day. It was a description of my day, where my pain or paralysis was, my overall pain for the day, and then I filled these boxes with common symptoms I had. So this helped my doctors figure out patterns with my illness and to figure out where what would be the best treatment for me. So a few reasons why tracking symptoms is very essential in medical care. One of the biggest ones is, as it happened to me, it allowed for my medical professionals to diagnose me. One of my diagnoses, you have to have 2 recorded sessions in order to be diagnosed with it. So it was just essential to track this. Along with that, it allows easier management for multiple medical professionals. For me, I have about 4 to 5 medical professionals I'm working with at any given moment. So keeping everyone on the same page and giving them all the same information might help them figure out one thing. A lot of them are specialists, so they're really good at what they're specialized in. But if you have questions about something else, they really don't know. So keeping everyone on the same page and organizing them really helps out with care. Unfortunately, the last one is also essential, proof for insurance and employment purposes. I really don't look that sick. So proving to insurance or employers that I am sick can help me get disability rights or just, approval for medications and all that good stuff. So my proposed solution was kind of threefold. One, the main thing is to make an application to allow users to track their symptoms. This would help people who need to track their symptoms also have access to the information at all times. For instance, in like an emergency purpose, their doctors would be able to see if any medications have helped before, if there's a track record of this, so they're able to provide the best care. And then also another big one is to allow users to easily share this information to medical professionals, because that's also pretty essential. You don't want it to just be for them. So how I implemented this, I used Xmerium. This was mainly because there was a shared code base for cross-platform. I know as a human being, I wasn't going to be able to build it both for like Xcode and in Android Studio. So this allowed me to share code for both. Also, I work in HTML for my job, so XML was pretty easy for me to learn. I used Oracle for my databases, which we'll get into that later, but it was mainly for security purposes, and I know I wanted to keep mine on the web. And Oracle also gave me 2 free databases, so that was pretty cool, and it'll allow me to scale if I continue this project in the future. And I use a bunch of different libraries and dependencies to make everything all pretty. So we're going to start with my databases first to kind of give everyone a background before we get into the demo. So this is my first database. This is for the users, so it's just information about the users, all that good stuff. So this is my relational database. So it has 3 tables. One is for personal details, just, you know, the normal user stuff. One is for medications, so like the name, dosage, date started, all that good stuff. The only thing that's required in that database is the name. You don't really need anything else. And then the last one is diagnoses. So yeah, and the personal details has the primary key, and then that key is used as a foreign key in the other tables, as you can see. It's very nice. Oracle did a good job on that. I was proud. But anyways, moving on to my other database, which is my NoSQL or JSON database. So this is for the daily logs that I'll be showing on later, but this is just an example of how the data is formatted. So it has the email, so I can look them up in the user database, and then all the different scales, the date, medications, a list of them, so they can add multiple, and then a list of symptoms. I really needed to use a NoSQL database for this because of the last 2. I didn't know how many medications or symptoms a user was going to give me. So I needed something that would allow me to have variable data like this. So now the fun part is some demos. So first you're going to see is the sign up screen. It's working. So they click create a new account and then enter in all of their information. I didn't do any fun names on this, sorry. I did have a confirm email because I know I mistype my email on almost every form I fill out, so I figured I would help other people like me. Currently, I don't have much security checks on the passwords, but it does hide it, so it's not in plain text. And then they're able to select their relation, and then they're separating their diagnoses by commas. This does not have a character limit, so you can just keep typing, because I know there's some that are like really long. If I typed out the first one, it would have been 4 words long. Next is the medications. So they're able to type in the name, the dosage, what date they started, and it's just a fun date picker. And then ordering physician, the only thing that's required on this is a medication name if they start filling it out. Otherwise, nothing is required. And then a review page to go over everything. And here is one of the fun parts about having an Oracle database. I did click the submit button. It is running currently, but it will take about 20 seconds to actually get to the next page. I couldn't figure out if this was an issue with the REST service I was using within Experian or the databases. So it eventually gets there, but it takes a little bit. But they get a fun message if something fails or something like that happens. So next is the login screen. So you can type in email and a password, and then again, we're gonna have to wait a few seconds once I hit login, and then it will check the user database to see if your email matches one, as along with the password combination, all that good stuff. And then after we keep reading, all right, so then it'll bring you to home screen. There is another API running right now for this screen. Again, I need to work on the timing. But it's looking at the daily logs database, and then as you can see now, it got all those numbers for you in there. So it's an average of the daily logs for the past 7 days. So it looks over that time frame and then changes those accordingly. So it just averages them out like a mean. So then next, also that one that is under the home screen. But next is looking at calendar view, daily logs view. I didn't know what I wanted to name this. So that's daily logs button down there. Shows you a nice calendar. And then this is where they're able to see just a quick overview of their scales over the past or over those dates. So I finally picked one that actually had numerical values. And then I'm picking one back in November as well that gives you values. So any date they filled out a log with their username or with their email, it will fill these bad boys in. All right, next is most of the meat and potatoes is new logs. So this is when a user would fill out those daily logs to fill in the information for everything else. So we'll run that. So they click on the new log button on the bottom of the screen. And then they pick their levels on a scale of 0 to 10 with 0 being the best, 10 being the worst. That's just the most common in the medical field. If they're on their period and then their average heart rate. None of these are required fields, so they're able to fill out just what they want with each log. Next is symptoms. They are able to fill out the name, the severeness on the same scale, time frame, the placement, whether they're able to continue on with daily life, and then any notes. And then at the bottom of the screen, click add another symptom, puts the first symptom up in a list, and you're able to add another one. And next is medications. This is very similar to the sign up screen you saw. So just name of medication, time taken, dosage, whether it's a daily medication, any notes. The notes was added mainly because you can say if like the medication worked or not, how fast it worked, all that good stuff that doctors want to know. Hit next, then you get to another review page, levels, symptoms, medications, nothing too detailed because it is a phone. I did click the submit button, but we're back to our very favorite APIs. It's going to take a second to load. And then once you get back to this page, as you can see, all the values are automatically updated with your new values that you just entered in because you entered a new one today. So that's that. And then the last piece was getting this into a way so that doctors were able to view this information nicely. So this is what I have labeled the print logs. So you click on print log at the bottom of the screen, and then you're able to pick the dates that you want. You can pick any dates that you want, but it just has to, the first one has to be smaller than the last one. And then when you hit print, if you haven't allowed access yet to your device, you have to allow. If you deny, it'll give you an error message. And if it was a success, it shows you that your logs were put into the files folder, into a special daily logs folder, which I am going to attempt to navigate to. Had some troubles with my Android emulator. It was not liking me last night. So once you open your files folder, you go to your SD card and there'll be a fun folder for the logs. Then you find one for today. So this is the first page of the logs. I'm gonna pause it here. Actually, I'm allowed to. Nope. Okay. So it gives you, this is the title on every page, the user, the dates, gives you a quick explanation of how it works. And then it gives you an average, a low, and a high. Low and a high have the dates for those logs as well. And then Yeah, I actually did pause it. We'll see if it continues. Nope. We'll get there. A sec. Wow, that was lovely. Okay, now I can scroll through everything, which will help us. Okay. Okay, so here's the next page. So this is an example of a daily log. So same header as before, just to keep things consistent, the date of the log, then you get all of your scales nicely formatted there. Then you get a list of the symptoms. So I have the name and then the time frame in parentheses, the severeness and where the symptom was located, and then any notes. And then same thing for the one below. And then any medications taken, time, what was the dosage, and any notes would be below there as well. So what went wrong? Oracle was a huge issue. Their docs are awful, to say it nicely. Yeah, they're bad. My two databases are using two completely separate APIs configured in two completely separate ways. I attempted to do it the same way, did not work. I attempted to try to do it another same way, did not work. Only worked after I complained to my dad for about 20 minutes about it, and then it magically worked. Don't know what happened there, but thanks, Dad. Magic, that's what I'm convinced. Another thing that went wrong for me was being a user, a product owner, and a developer. At my job, I'm very much in a structured agile environment. So destructuring myself from that was pretty difficult, as trying to be a user of, I want a lot of features and this would be cool, to being a product owner of, hey, we only have this much time, this is how we're prioritizing things, and being a developer saying, hey, you can't do that, that's not feasible. Trying to keep that all into one little brain was a little difficult this semester. Another thing was context switching. This is nothing to do with the application, but just me again. On any given day, I was working between like 5 different languages, between school, a job, and this. So trying to keep languages like in a good row was difficult. I made a lot of dumb programming errors just because I was switching between like HTML and JavaScript and C# and it was rough, but we got there. So what went well? My concept to execution went really well in my opinion. This is an idea I've had for a really long time. So I wasn't sure how it was going to end up. There was a lot of bumps in the road that could have happened that didn't. So that felt pretty good. Xmerion actually worked out really well. They have a lot of good docs and they just format their things really nicely. You're able to add components really nicely. So that was fun. And for the most part, I was able to find the correct solution quickly by Googling, besides Oracle, but that's its own issue. So that was really nice. It was a good feeling that it was like, hey, I have this problem. I was able to find a good solution for it pretty quickly. So what's next? First is to get security with the databases working. The only way I could make the databases work currently is with making them public routes. So if I ever wanted to go public with this, I would have to make sure I can secure those and then have a specific user for the application and send that over. But again, Oracle, it was the bane of my existence this semester. allow the user to log out. This is a pretty simple feature. I just didn't get around to it. So that would be a big thing for me to add. A better UI. I work in UI, so it's probably me just nagging on my own UI, but it could be so much better. So I would just like that. And then also I have a list of recommendations from users. So I have a bunch of friends who are also chronically ill, groups them in, who have given me recommendations of what they would like. So I have a running list of that as well. So some lessons learned. One is to take time to research before implementing anything. I can probably say most people who have done their senior project agree with this. I got better at this as I went on, and the quicker you realize this, the quicker your project will go. So taking 2 hours to research will save you probably about 6 hours of development time. The second is just because it works doesn't mean it's the correct way. In a lot of our classes, you just kind of make something work, and it doesn't matter if it's good code or not, it just works. But for this, I really had to think about, is this good code? Will this go fast on mobile development and all that good stuff? And then 3, working in a team is a huge benefit. Trying to do everything yourself is really difficult. So if you ever work in an agile team, like, be very thankful for your product owners and your scrum masters and your BAs, like, they're great. So trying to do all that once is really difficult. So just for me, I just want some acknowledgements, especially to my family and my friends. Putting me in this place, especially being chronically ill, has been difficult, and all of them have made sacrifices. So I'm just very thankful. Also to my professors for being really cool when I have to dip out and go remote for half a semester. So are there any questions? There is an integration with Experian. I forget what it's called. It'll come to me eventually, but it just generates it for you. I had to do some funky stuff to file save it because Android hates that. But once I got through the funky stuff, it was actually a pretty simple process. So it was just a component I added.
Have you been using this? You just said that you guys like printed out a zillion things that, are you using that stuff currently with your doctors? Are you going to be using this with your doctors? Is that like the goal?
Yeah, so this is something I would use. I know I have some of my best friends would also use it. So this would be something I would likely use to a few people first to see how it handles that before going through it. But I know when I did like the big binder of stuff, my doctors looked at me and they're like, this is fantastic. Like this helps a lot. So trying to get that into more people's hands was a big goal.
Yeah, but then the next step with a data science approach would be, you're collecting all the data to visualize it in some sort of chart format, whatever, that could be a big deal because you bring in a binder, well, a human being's not going to be able to process that and say, oh, I see this pattern where, every other week you having these dips.
Yep.
and those kind of things.
Yeah. So like to pattern it, like the averages, and then eventually doing some machine learning to get like common symptoms and stuff, because they can write whatever they want. But if I can figure out their words, that would also be a goal. Yes.
My technology knowledge. Do you see, I guess, going one further on this goal that this could potentially be an all-inclusive health app? Because a lot of the things that you showed, like concepts and designs, are very similar to a lot of certain like apps within the fitness industry, stuff like that. Do you see potentially like super pie in the sky if there was a way to literally someone can have their entire database of like, here are symptoms or illnesses, here is medication, here are other supplements, here is exercise, here is like nutrients, like all in one?
Yeah, that would be dope. That would be that'd be pretty difficult. I know one of the things on my list is to integrate like a food log into it. So that'd be one of the first things, and then integrating stuff like Apple Health and stuff like that. But yeah, it would be cool to do a full thing, but that's also really big
Oh, yeah.
project wise, so I'm only
I guess
one.
it was just like unlimited resources, unlimited time, like, is that possible?
Oh yeah, it's possible.
Feel like I should publicly apologize to Bushy because she's messing up Xamarin way worse than Django. And that's like hard to pronounce. What do you say? Xamarin?
Xmerian?
Experience? I don't think any of those letters. Like my wife can't say the word ambulance. It's ambulance, no matter how many times ambulance are all.
I'll get more points knocked off for that.
Xamarin,
Xamarin?
Xamarin.
That should be with a Z.
No, that would be true, but I mean, you have all sorts of like little twisted ninja moves in the middle of it, and those letters aren't there.
You should have seen Joe cringing throughout it. Yeah, because it's okay. Let's find the slide.
Next, go back forward, there you
X. Marion.
go. Marin, 3 other letters, you had to get Marin. Not Marion.
Well, you know, I got there.
All of a sudden, the Django.
List of the worst pronounced words in your senior project.
My wedding, when I had the kids, like my phone number, so photographer guy, I think I had like 2 digits right at my whole phone. I feel like you're pretty close to that with the letters you're pronouncing in the word.
I got an X, an M, and for sure an N.
Oh, okay. Less than half.
You could argue an R too.
It's a soft and a hard on. Another question?
Yes.
So like, I feel like once you get to some people, like especially in testing phase, like I know like I had a feature where people could potentially like, communicate via the app. So for instance, you have insert illness, it leads you to your own people with a way to friend each other or something that people can give it to you.
Yeah, like have like,
Say insert friend has same symptoms, and you can compare and discuss via the app.
yeah, like have a community tab.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's something I've definitely thought about with it too, just because it's a lonely place. But yes.
As a parent, is there gonna be, like, would you want something where they have access to it so that if for some reason you couldn't answer the question,
You could link
Yeah.
accounts. That's something I've thought about too. That's why I had the user types of like person tracking your own caregiver. So I had this whole plan for caregiver of like, you can link up to like a child account or something like that, or a partner account. So you can have the same access as them, but you're just on your own account, marks it differently. Didn't implement that, but yes, again, long to-do list.
Anything else? Good work. I think that's a cool project now.
All right, so my senior for Capstone project, I'm gonna start out with a question. It's gonna be, have you ever had or attempted to make a secret code with friends, family, anything in high school? I think this is a fun one that I found on the internet. So what my project is a cipher app Why? Well, in high school, my friends and I all wanted to create a way to discuss with each other, but not let teachers, other people and whatnot know what we're saying to each other. There's one time in math class, we all learned Morse code to try to help each other out on a test. Teacher knew Morse code, caught us, and it didn't work out too well. I use C#. The last time I used any type of programming language was sophomore year. I haven't used it since. So like I was taught, if you don't use it, you kind of lose the knowledge of how to use it. I also use Visual Studio Community. Again, sophomore year, software engineering class, we used it. I was still very lost then, so I decided to challenge myself. So why? Like I said, high school idea with my friends, my coworkers, where I actually internship at Skygen as well on the help desk team. My coworkers and boss thought it would be a fun idea for me to show them that I can take a language that I have some knowledge in, but not enough. So they did suggest I use Java or Python, which I already am quite fluent in. So they decided to use C#. They also wanted me to spend time on something that I would enjoy and not something that I would hate, because if I hated the project, I wouldn't want to spend time on it. I also wanted to show them that I could learn and code in a language that they wanted, C#. And then I can also use this to show work that I can develop workable apps with a new language in about 1.5 to 2 months with a month of prep. So the problem is make an app where I can use ciphers to share with friends. I took the idea of cipher and secret codes, and I made a way to encrypt and decrypt 2 different ciphers. And then I also have a Morse code, which I never got around to figuring out how to decrypt. I can only encrypt. Those include the Visionaire cipher and then a simple Caesar cipher or a shift cipher. Also, I want to make a way for kids who want to send and make hidden messages easily to do that. And then also how to adapt and roll with any setbacks that I had faced. So my target audience would be middle school to high school age kids. Anyone younger or older than that can also easily learn how to use it. And I also wanted to work on design, or maybe have a friend of mine who knows how to design and teach me to make the app interface more friendly for a wider variety of people. So quick demo of it. Shout out to TeamViewer. I learned about this through my coworkers. Since I can't use Visual Studio Community on my Mac, I had to remote into my PC, which is on in my room. Don't get me started on Mac. I am not a fan of it. It's not my favorite. So what I have is the login screen, but I don't have an account. So I create account, something simple. It does have check. If I create account, it shows me that something's wrong. Create the account, I type it in. Again, it checks it to make sure for both username and password. You can go. So this is the very straightforward menu. I got my Caesar cipher, which is if I type in that, go up by 2, encrypt. This is what shoots out. Doesn't make any sense, I know. Copy. You can save it to your clipboard through the button. You can also save it, which saves inside the program itself. You can clear, undo. If I decrypt, I can paste in what I just got out. I can go up by 2 and it gives me what would be, again, I can copy, clear, undo, save, and then back to menu. Morse code, again, type something in. This is what the Morse code would be for test this space now. The slash is where the space would be to kind of decipher where you're putting spaces and whatnot. For people who may not know Morse code, I do have a way which you can type in a letter and it'll give you a key. And I'm trying to make a better way to differentiate where what letter you type in. So right now I just have an arrow pointing, and this works for any whatever. And then also right here, it shows you what the symbol is for it. So you can go back or go straight back to menu. Then I got the Visionaire cipher, where again, I can type with the key. Key is important for the Visionaire because without the key, you can't uncode it. So if I type in something, can't think of a word, I'm just gonna type in the, that's what it encrypts into. Copy this, go to decrypt, Velcro it in, type in the key, gives it back. If I type in something that's not the key, it doesn't give it back to me. I'm gonna go back, just gonna decrypt save just to show. I have a daily challenge. I'm gonna probably change this into something else. It's not really daily. Right now, all it is a simple Caesar cipher. It gives you a random string of letters from 4 to 9 letters, and it randomly sends you a shift for anywhere from 1 to 8. You can type in your answer here. I don't have any way to do this right off the top of my head. So if I type in something wrong and I check it, it tells me. But if I were to have this correct, it would tell me it's correct and show me the answer. I can also just reveal what the answer is just to demonstrate. It would send out the correct. I want to also make a way to show you how many got correct, make a easy, hard, medium sort of difficulty system. Save cipher. So every time I hit the save, it would show you where it's saved. You can copy it if you want to go back to it. And it's kind of just for each one of these. So on and so forth menu. Then you can log out. Say you forgot your password, because that happens to everyone. You type in your username to check, and then you can change your password. Oh, my username is incorrect. It checks that. I can change it. And if I were to use the same password twice, going back into this, it's already logged in that I have that as my password. So then you can go back to have an account, and it lets you log in. So that's the app. Go back to this guy. So some challenges I came across. Like I said, I couldn't use Visual Studio Community on my laptop. Didn't know why. I tried everything to get it to work. Luckily, my coworkers at SkyGen had told me about TeamViewer, and I can use it completely free as long as I'm not making money off of it. Honestly, Visual Studio Community C# databases are an absolute pain. I couldn't figure it out for the life of me. I have it created where when I log in, it creates the database, creates a row, and adds all the data. I could not figure out how to get that to check the login. So with the login screen, I have a class set up that gets set, and it sets everything up that way. But I looked into the database, everything goes correctly. I just can't access it. The save button, that took a while. The save button right now saves inside the program itself. For the longest time, I was having difficulties with the save button saving to my computer, but corrupting the file, so I couldn't actually open it. Design, as you could see, I'm not the most artsy. I'm very block thinking, straight to the point. I only include what needs to be there, and I don't really get too cute with it. And then my biggest problem was I would try doing the entire project at once rather than taking into separate chunks. And by the end of the project, I started realizing that focusing on one thing at a time got me farther than trying to do the entire thing at once. My internship, I didn't realize how much time the internship would suck away from being able to do school, being able to do this project, and having a social life all on top of it. So that it took a while, but I figured out how to balance everything. And then another one is procrastination. I'm probably the king of it. I love to put everything off as long as I can when I can, because you know the saying, you're smarter later in time. So just wait until then. Successes that I had, luckily I was able to learn C# fairly quickly with the help of my coworkers, lots of trial and error, and then my base understanding of Java and Python. The working login created a new count page. I thought that would have taken a lot longer. I wish I could have gotten the databases working, but I still was able to make a working login page and a forgot password. I'm most proud of the Caesar cipher because I think that's what took the longest for me to figure out, other than the Visionaire cipher, because everything else, once I figured out how to get that to work, everything kind of formed around it. And then also shout out to TeamViewer for being just existing. What I learned, use your resources, ask for help. The one thing I don't like doing is asking for help from other people. I like to do it on my own, how I like to do it, when I like to do it. But once I started asking around at work, some friends of mine from back home that know how to code, they were able to help me out. C# and Visual Studio Community, I have a much better understanding of how to use both of them, how to create apps and whatnot. How to develop an app. I'm starting to get to the point in my life where I'm realizing that doing it all at once, looking at the big project is a terrible way to go at a problem. You have to start looking at it in chunks. Working in a team is much easier than doing it alone. I found myself burning out very quickly when I was trying to do a lot all at one time. Working in a team, working with the help desk, I realized that I'm able to ask them for help and also pair up with them to do some of the work for me rather than me just doing the entire thing on my own. And then time management, don't procrastinate. If I had another month, I would try to find a way to save the program itself to my desktop rather than just in the program itself. Create a better database to retain information. I do have one. It's very, very simple, but be able to do that in the sense of the create login, create new account, and then even maybe save the ciphers in there. Very simple and more than one undo click. I put that on the back burner and I realized that I ran out of time and couldn't figure that, or not figure it out, but fix it. And then make it possible to see how the cipher works within it. Like the Morse code, I had the key, but with like a Caesar cipher or the Visionaire cipher, have a way to show you how it got to the output that it gave you rather than just spit out a random thing that makes no sense. And questions?
You mentioned that Caesar cipher was the challenge. What was challenging about the Caesar cipher?
It was the creating a array and being able to call into the array. I think I had two arrays inside of each other trying to communicate, and I think was a big challenge for me, just to remember how arrays worked, how to be able to call letters in the right way, because I would have a way of calling, it would just give me the wrong letters the entire time. And then I think the one that took longer was trying to decrypt it, trying to tell it, hey, you have to go the other way. I've learned a lot of shortcuts now to figure that out, but I was hard coding a lot of it. And once I figured out those shortcuts, it was a lot easier for me to figure out.
Now, on your Mac, you said you couldn't get Visual Studio running. I mean, were you trying to run the Mac version of Visual Studio?
Yeah, I tried and it wouldn't download for me.
Is this a newer Mac? Like
Yeah.
With an M1 chip in it?
I think so.
Yeah, so they just came out with a new Visual Studio for Mac that supports the M1 chip. So that's probably what was going on there. But just for your own future reference, there's a free product from Oracle people called VirtualBox. So you could have just emulated Windows and
yeah.
you could have also run a program called Wine on your Mac, which
I
lets you run
yeah.
Windows applications. You could use Parallels, VMware, lots of parallel virtualization software. And then if you like TeamViewer, another product is called DNC Viewer.
That's
put DNC server on a machine, DNC Viewer on another one, and it doesn't have some of the limitations where they're seeing if you're using it for like professional work and stuff like that. The TeamViewer has, just for future reference.
Yeah, the wine one was one that my the coworker that works mostly with the cyber team had suggested. That one of the TeamViewer were the two big ones that he was.
That program exists for like Linux developers or Linux users to be able to play video games on a Linux machine that are Windows-based things. And Mac OS is a Unix-based operating system. So lots of fun things you could play with there. But yeah, the new architecture from Mac, which is a really good architecture, I'm sure that was probably the problem. The M1 architecture is not Intel compatible.
Yeah.
And Apple tries to do, they have a program called Rosetta that tries to do the translation, and it probably just didn't work well.
Yeah.
So that was probably the punchline. Other questions?
Yep.
It's probably a very hypothetical question. Do you ever think about creating like email like grids and then like close your ears off so then like students could like email like back and forth with each
Yeah.
other with the ciphers?
I was thinking of a share, like a way to share. I'm still gonna work on it. Definitely update it, but a share button was definitely something that was on my mind. I would, yeah. I also want to make a community way to also just be able to talk with other people and just kind of share ideas or kind of share like the one challenge one, but have their own where they can send out ones that they create themselves rather than a computer generated one.
Other questions? Going once? Going twice? Hey, so that is it for tonight. Let's see, who do we have